How will A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms be different than Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon? Let's dive right in. Number one, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms only has two main characters. One of the main appeals of Game of Thrones was that it explored such a widespread cast of characters, with so many narratives to keep track of. Game of Thrones offered an inherent complexity, and House of the Dragon has followed suit. The first prequel, House of the Dragon, was slightly more focused on the happenings of the Targaryen dynasty, but still has a vast variety of characters. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will be much different, with a more direct focus on only Dunk and Egg. It will be drastically different in tone, narrative, pacing, complexity, and more. Rather than an event driven epic with interweaving plots to follow, the new prequel will be more focused on drawing the viewer into the conflicts of its main protagonist. It will be drastically different in tone, narrative, pacing, complexity, and more. Yes. Next, we have A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will be a much lighter tone. It should have a significantly lighter tone than the previous Game of Thrones shows, but it's all relative. Keep in mind, this is still a story coming from George Martin, so there are bound to be some horrific, violent moments. However, in terms of general tone, the new series should offer far more fun and humor, not in the sense that it's pure comedy, but in the same way as Arya's travels with the Hound in Game of Thrones. Next, the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will visit different parts of Westeros. Throughout Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon, we have been introduced to many of the strongest castles in Westeros, typically with the seats of the great houses like Winterfell, Casterly Rock, or Riverrun. In the Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, we might get a tour of the more realistic side of Westeros. Again, the closest comparison that we can see was when Arya and the Hound were together, though they were traveling through the Riverlands after it had been devastated by the War of the Five Kings. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will explore various regions of Westeros, such as the smaller fort of Standfast in the Reach, while Game of Thrones demonstrates the feudal system in the Seven Kingdoms at a high level. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will examine how this society works for the lesser noble houses and the common folk. The Dunk and Egg novels are much shorter than A Song of Ice and Fire novels. Aside from being lighter in tone, the Dunk and Egg novels are literally lighter books than the main series. As shown in what we see, Game of Thrones, which equated to season one of Game of Thrones, was about 292,000 total words. A Storm of Swords, which split into Game of Thrones season 3 and 4, was 400,000 words. In comparison, all three Dunk and Egg novels combined are only 100,000 words. So that means adapting each one into a television season will likely require some narrative inflation, which that'll be interesting to see how HBO does that. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms won't have any dragons. So for you dragon lovers, that is a little unfortunate. But it occurs after all the dragons have died out. As viewers know from Game of Thrones, there were no dragons at the start of the show, as the species died out in Westeros over 100 years prior. On the overall timeline, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms takes place about 90 years before Game of Thrones and 80 years after the dance, meaning that Targaryen kings have reigned without dragons for decades at this point. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms won't focus on King's Landing politics as much as Game of Thrones or House of the Dragon. In many ways, House of the Dragon posed a spin-off idea that offered numerous differences, but was provided Game of Thrones fans with many aspects of the world that they are already familiar with. The central focus on succession surrounding the Iron Throne is easy to follow for viewers that are knowledgeable of the original show. A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms will be far from the Red Keep, though major events pertaining to House of the Dragon and House Targaryen will occur in the background. Given that Egg is a Targaryen prince and future king, the TV show will likely keep audiences informed of some of what's happening in Westeros politics. After all, the events occurring in King's Landing are always looming over the small folk of Westeros in some capacity. Throughout the series, there will be conflicts between Targaryen kings and members of court, including significant events like the First Blackfire Rebellion. The difference is they'll just probably be happening in the background. And finally, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms has a smaller budget than GOT or House of the Dragon. George Martin has specifically offered praise for A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms as a smaller show than the previous two shows, stating that the series is working under a much smaller budget than House of the Dragon. While this may raise some initial flags, it does make a lot of sense given that everything that we know about the series. The actors are and the cast are relatively unknown. There's less episodes. From right now, we believe there will be 6, and there won't be as much CGI with the dragons, with there being no dragons in the show. And with all that in mind, we should not, and you should not, expect a decline in quality, as that's one of the main aspects HBO and Game of Thrones has been highly regarded for. The production team has been shooting in Belfast, Northern Ireland, in the same studio as the original TV show, and should have a similar visual aesthetic to the early Game of Thrones seasons. So there you have it, A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms. Are you excited for this show? We know that it should be coming out hopefully sometime in early 2025. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.